So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin, iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayra al-maghdubi alayhim, walad-dallin, sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم منا جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقينا وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد منا لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Peace be upon you, O Aba Abdullah, and upon the souls who have gathered in your courtyard. Upon you from us all is the peace of God forever, for as long as we remain and as long as night and day endure. And may God never make this our last pledge to visit you. Peace be upon Hussein, and upon Ali the son of Hussein, and upon the children of Hussein, and upon the companions of Hussein. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So, last night, a voice reached us across 14 centuries. That was the voice of the sister, said Zaynab, peace and blessings be upon her, the witness after the witness, who took a captive's chains and turned them into a pulpit, and who would not let the empire name what it had done. We left her standing in the throne room of Damascus, unbroken. And we left ourselves with a question that her standing forces upon anyone who hears it. She did the thing. But what does her doing of it ask of us? That's where tonight begins. Because if we think about it, it would be the easiest thing in the world to just admire Sayyid Zainab in the same way someone admires a mountain from a great distance with no real thought of ever climbing it, ever getting close to it. To say how extraordinary she was, how far beyond us, and then to go home unchanged. And the entirety of last night was an argument against exactly that comfort. The road she walked is our road. The stations she reached is the far end of a path that runs under our own very feet. Tonight, in this room. So, tonight we must ask the most practical question in our religion. What is the form of witness that is actually available to us? To you, to me. Not the witness of those who fall at the sword. Most of us will actually never really be asked for that. Not even the witness of the sister in the court of the tyrant. Very few of us will ever have to have such an experience. What is the witness available to the ordinary believer in an ordinary life in a city far away from any battlefield? And the answer that our tradition gives us has a name. And it is the most available grade of witness that there is. It is called Murābaṭa, the holding of a line, the keeping of a post. And the night's whole argument, stated plainly before we begin, is this. The frontier is not a line on a map. It is the seam between the oppressor and the oppressed on God's whole earth. And we are already standing at one such seam. Now there is a text that opens this for us, a supplication that millions, tens of millions of believers recite. And tragically, almost none have been shown what they are actually saying. It is the 27th supplication of Sahifa Sajjadiyya, the book of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him, the very Imam whose chained young figure we watched take the pulpit in Yazid's court last night. It is called Du'a Ahl al-Thughur, the supplication for the people of the frontiers. And tonight we open it. And I want everyone to take notice where we are beginning, because it is not an accident. Our broadcast tonight, following the Nawha prior to the Ziyarat Ashura, carries the entire supplication recited in Arabic with the translation, a clear translation. So I'm not going to walk you down it line by line. Instead, I want to open up its concepts, to teach the load-bearing ideas that a believer recites hundreds of times without ever being told or realizing what it is that they hold. And we begin with its very first petition. After the blessing on Prophet Muhammad and his family, the Imam asks, and of course the references are all in the write-up. Imam Sajjad says, "O God, send your choicest blessings on Muhammad and his family, and fortify the frontiers of the Muslims through your might, and support their protectors through your strength, and lavish upon them gifts through your wealth." Fortify the frontiers of the Muslims. Keep that line in your mind, the frontiers of the Muslims, because before this night is over, we will watch it turn into something that I don't think anyone expected. And we're not the first to begin over here. In our own age, when the martyred Wali al-Faqih, Imam Sayyid Ali al-Khamenei, wanted to point the community at the deep ocean of the Ahl al-Bayt's teaching, he reached for exactly this supplication. On the official record of his office, Sayyid Ali al-Husseini al-Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, led with this very line, "O God, fortify the frontiers of the Muslims through your might." And he called Sahifa Sajjadiyya by a name that is truly worth remembering. Again, the references are all in the write-up. Imam Khamenei called Sahifa, he said, the Sahifa Sajjadiyya is the great ocean of Islamic teaching. So we begin, in other words, exactly where our beloved Imam pointed to. And the first thing the prayer asks for is not a wall. So, to understand what this supplication is, we have to first understand the condition of the man who wrote it. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him, came off the field of Karbala the one surviving man of the household, and into 34 years of life under the heel and the constant surveillance of the Umayyad regime. He was constantly watched. Every word he spoke in public was carried back to Damascus. The open teaching that his grandfather, the commander of the faithful, had done from the pulpit of Kufa was for Imam Sajjad simply not an option, not possible. A teaching circle that looked even remotely political would have ended in his death and the end of the line. So look at what he did. He took the one form of speech that a tyranny cannot easily ban, because to ban supplication is to be seen to be banning a man from speaking to God. And he poured the entire curriculum into that. He taught through supplication. The Sahifa Sajjadiyya is doctrine encrypted in prayer, theology, ethics, statecraft, and the whole inner architecture of faith, smuggled past the censor inside the one medium that the censor could not touch. It is the prayer that had to carry a curriculum because the man who wrote it was not allowed to teach. And here's the thing I want you to feel before we go even a step further. This supplication, the prayer for the people of the frontiers, is its own subject. A man under occupation, forbidden to hold the line in the open, holds it in prayer. The text does not merely talk about holding a line under occupation. It is the act of holding a line under occupation. Keep that in mind. We will return to it because by the end of tonight, God willing, it will turn out to be exactly what we are doing in this room. So here's a question. What is a frontier? What is a tether? Our scholars are precise about this, and the precision is the actual doorway that opens to everything. And the most celebrated classical commentary of the Sahifa, which is known as Riyad al-Salikin of Sayyid Ali Khan al-Madani, opens the word for us. Thughur, he says, is the plural of Thaghr. And Thaghr, or a Thaghr, is the vulnerable place, the gap, the point through which the enemy is feared to enter. And then, Sayyid Madani, he gives the image that the Imam himself chose. The word Thaghr is the same word that the Arabs use for the mouth, because the mouth is the opening through which a thing passes into the interior of the body. The frontier is the mouth of the land. It is the breach in the wall through which what is outside gets in. Sayyid Madani writes, and the references are all in the write-up. He says, al-Thughur is the plural of Thaghr, which refers to the vulnerable location from which an enemy attack is feared. It is called a Thaghr, a gap, a mouth, because it is like a breach in a wall. And he asked for their fortification through his might, because every fortress other than his fortification is prone to collapse. And every might other than his might is in truth humiliation and surrender. Now listen to what Sayyid Madani did to the whole idea of frontier. The Imam did not pray, build them a higher wall. He prayed, fortify them through your might. Because every fortress that is only a fortress will collapse. The true fortress is not the wall. The true fortress is the care of God. The stone is necessary, but the stone is never sufficient. A people can have the highest wall on earth and be utterly defenseless. And a people can have no wall at all and be a fortress, if the might they are tied to is his. And we can see this in the world. I will not go into it, but we can see this in the world today. Those who build huge walls are extremely insecure, constantly playing the victim. And those who are the most oppressed because they trust in Allah, in God, they are always the heroes. Moving on, but there is a word that this whole night turns on. The one who holds the Thaghr is called a Murābaṭa. And Murābaṭa comes from the root word rabt, which means to tie, to bind, or to tether. The frontier guard is, by the very name, the one who is tied to the seam, the one who has bound himself to the line and will not be pulled off it. Keep that again, the one who is tied, because again, by the end of tonight, God willing, a man of our own lifetime is going to define it for us in a letter to his daughter, and you will hear the same root come back. Now let's see what our scholars do with this. Shaheed Ayatollah Murtada Mutahari, may God rest his pure soul, in his study titled Jihad, takes the idea of a frontier and refuses to let it stay on a map at all. Shaheed Mutahari writes, and of course the references are in the write-up, the borders of Islam are not geographical boundaries, lines drawn on a map. They are creedal and ideological frontiers. If the whole earth belongs to God, then the true frontier is the dividing line between truth and falsehood, wherever on this earth such a line may fall. There it is. The true frontier is the line between truth and falsehood, wherever it falls. Now, we were promised at the start that we would watch the word frontier turn from a place into a condition. And alhamdulillah, praise be to God, it has just begun to turn. Please give me a salawat and we move on to the battle before the battle.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
And at the very first frontier the supplication asks God to secure is not on any border at all. It is inside the chest of the one holding the line. This is the actual thesis verse, the heart of this entire prayer. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him, asks God for the defenders in this way. The reference is in the write-up. He says, and make them forget when they meet the enemy to remember this cheating and delusive world of theirs, and erase from their hearts the thought of its enchanting possessions, and place the garden before their eyes. Look at the order of operations that Imam Zayn al-Abidin is putting in place over here. Before the sword meets the sword, before a single arrow flies, the Imam asks God to clear the world out of the defender's heart. Why? Because he is naming with the precision of a physician the actual reason men break and run. They don't flee because the enemy is strong. They flee because there is something in their own hearts that they are still holding on to. A life, a comfort, a possession, a future, children, this, that, and the other. And the moment the fight threatens that thing pulls them backwards off the line. The outer line is held by first winning an inner line. And he names the specific poison. خطرات المال الفتون, the whispering thought of seductive wealth. Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, lingered on exactly this phrase when he taught this supplication. And what he drew out of it is the whole inner theology of the frontier. The references in the write-up, Imam Khamenei said, erase from their hearts the whisperings of seductive wealth. Fitna does not always mean strife in the social arena. The worst fitna is the one inside the human heart. If you open to the heart the road of the love of wealth and of a life of prestige and rank and grandeur, it will not stop at any limit. The worst fitna is the one inside the heart. This is what we have called, almost every single night of this entire series, the greater jihad, jihad al-akbar, living inside the lesser. The companions of Imam al-Hussein, peace and blessings be upon them, did not win their battle on the morning of Ashura. They won it the night before, when each and every one of them offered his life and he was given leave to go. But they conquered the small voice in their own chest that may have wanted to go. By the time they faced the swords, the inner frontier was already held. That is what the supplication is asking God to do for every guardian of every line. Win the battle in the heart, and the battle on the border is half won already. So the frontier is first an inner thing. But there is one more question, and it is the hinge on which the entire night swings. What is the frontier guarding? What is so precious that God is asked to fortify the very mouth of the land in order to keep it safe? Let's listen to the Imam's own answer. And it is probably one of the most important sentences in this supplication. Again, the reference is in the write-up. Imam Sajjad writes, and give them respite from their fighting, that they may worship you, and from their warfare, that they may be alone with you, so that none be worshipped in the regions of the earth except you, and no forehead of theirs be rubbed in the dust for less than you. That no forehead be rubbed in the dust for less than you. That is what the frontier is for. Not soil, not a flag, not the borders of a country. The whole reason a line is held, the whole reason a wall is raised, is so that somewhere behind it, a human forehead can still go down to the ground before God alone, so that the prostration stays free. The frontier exists to keep the sujood safe. The frontier exists to keep the prayer safe. War is asked for here only so that the fighting may cease into worship. The enemy is broken only so that the prayer mat is protected. The destination is not conquest. The destination is heads on the ground, foreheads on the ground. And the forehead on the ground, think about this, because this is actually the seam, the seam of this whole night, and it ties back to everything that we have done. The forehead on the ground is itself the witness, the body's own Shahada. And cast your mind back to Imam Hussein's final Sajjad. Now, when you prostrate, your whole frame says with no words that there is no God but God. So the frontier exists to keep the witness safe. The line is held so that the testimony can keep being made. That is why this is not a detour into military history. Murābaṭa, the holding of the line, is itself a grade of Shahada, of witness. It is the witness who guards the place where witness happens. So now a word about the hard lines. So before we go on, I have to do something honestly, because this supplication contains lines that are harsh. And potentially on a recording that may be clipped and shared, I would rather you heard them explained by someone who loves you rather than weaponized by someone who does not. Further into the prayer, the Imam asks God against the enemy army for terrible things, that their wombs be made barren, that no rain fall upon their land, that nothing grow from their soil, and so forth. People read these lines and they recoil, and some read them and then hand them to our enemies as proof of what we are. So hear what these lines are plainly. This is the language of war imprecation against a combatant aggressor in the genre of its age, when siege war was total and a prayer against an army was a prayer against its capacity to make war. It is bara'ah, disavowal of an oppressing power, and it remains such. And it has never been what we call bughd, which is hatred of a people as such. And we do not know this by softening the words. We know it because the supplication itself tells us its own aim. In the very verse we just read, the point is not the ruin of the enemy. The point is that the prostration be made safe. Every hard line in the prayer is capped by that purpose. Break the army's power so that the forehead can go to the ground in peace. And our jurists have a name for this. Ayatollah Sheikh Mohsen Araki, one of our respected teachers, writing on the jurisprudence of jihad, draws from this very supplication a principle, and the references are in the write-up. He says, this supplication founds the principle of the jurisprudence of limits in jihad. Jihad is not sacred chaos. It is a bounded ethical order. Jihad is not sacred chaos. This is a very important thing. It is bounded. It has a limit or limits a believer may not cross, even against an enemy who is crossing all of the limits. That is the answer to the lie that says all resistance is just terror dressed up as faith. Let us keep it short, let us keep it clear, and let us move on, because the prayer does that. We will, of course, come to this in future sessions, inshallah, God willing. And there is one more honest thing to say, and then we turn the corner. In its original 8th century form, this supplication named specific nations who pressed on the frontiers of the Muslims in the Imam's own time. The form that we recite and the form on our broadcast later on does not carry that list. It keeps instead the Imam's own universal clause, spoken in the same breath, where Imam Sajjad says, the references are in the write-up of course, those whose names and attributes are concealed, but whom you have counted through your knowledge and overseen through your power. So why do we keep this clause and not the old list? For 4 reasons, and they all matter. First, and this is the cleanest, we add not one word of our own. The universalizing clause is the Imam's own in the very same supplication. Second, the nations he named were examples, the aggressor powers of his moment. And many of those very people entered Islam in their millions in the centuries after. To freeze the list would be to betray the Imam's own meaning, because the prayer was never against a specific bloodline or a particular ethnicity, only against a state of enmity. Third, this universalized form is not our own invention. It is the form approved by the Wali al-Faqih. It is the one that is broadcast on the channels of the resistance and recited by men whose names we honor. Among them, the reciter, the martyr, Hajj Qasem Soleimani, may God rest his pure soul, who recited the prayer of the people of the frontiers for the believers in Lebanon, and who then became one of the people of the frontiers himself. Martyred in the Israeli strike on Dahia in the southern suburbs of Beirut in the evening of the 8th of October 2024, with members of his own family in the same dark weeks that took Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, may God rest his pure soul. A reciter of the prayer for the people of the frontiers, fallen on a frontier, the thesis of this very night made flesh in our own time. And fourth, beneath all of it, God's knowledge is the filter and God's justice is the judge. The prayer hands the naming to the one who counts when we cannot, whom you have counted through your knowledge. It never targeted a name. It targeted a state of enmity and left the rest to God. Keep that principle with you. Name the enmity, never the people, because we're going to need it twice more before this night is done. So this is where the first point lands. The frontier is first inner and its purpose is worship. The frontiers of the Muslims was never about soil. It is the guarding of the place where the forehead may still go down to God alone. Keep that, because perhaps when you open your phones or media or whatever tomorrow, they will try very hard to tell you that it's all about the soil. And the moment that you believe them, you'll start looking for your frontier in the wrong place entirely. Please give me a salawat and we move on to the next point, which is the line runs through every people.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So here's the question I can almost feel forming in the room, because it is the honest one. If the frontier is not soil, then what about the borders we actually live inside? We are not citizens of the frontier of truth and falsehood. We carry passports of real countries with real lines on the map. Are the Muslim lands the frontier then? Is the border of Iraq, of Lebanon, of Iran, of Pakistan, the Thughur that the supplication means? And the question underneath the question, the one the diaspora carries quietly, who drew those borders in the first place? Let me not pretend that the confusion isn't real. Let me try and clear it, God willing. And to clear it, I have to show you who last sat in a room and presumed to draw a living people on a map. So in the middle of the First World War, two men, one British, Sir Mark Sykes, and one French, François-Georges Picot, sat down in secret with the assent of the Russian Tsar and divided the Arab lands of the dying Ottoman Empire between their two empires. A blue zone for France, a red zone for Britain. Spheres of influence carved across peoples who were never asked and were never even told. It was concluded in an exchange of letters in May of 1916. And it sat inside a knot of three contradictory promises made in the same few years. Britain had promised the Arabs an independent state to get them to rise against the Ottomans. Then Britain and France secretly agreed to take those same lands for themselves. And then in the Balfour Declaration of November 1917, Britain promised a national homeland in Palestine, a land already promised to one people and already carved up by two empires and inhabited by a third who were never even consulted. Three promises to three parties over one land, and not one of them compatible with the other. The Arabs learnt of this secret carve-up only because the Russian revolutionaries following the Bolshevik Revolution found the treaty in the Tsar's archives and published it to the world in November of 1917. Now, and this is where we keep our own discipline, the discipline we demand of everyone else. And I'm not going to hand you the popular myth, because the popular myth is half false, and a half false weapon breaks in your hand. The myth says, 2 Europeans drew the straight lines of the modern Middle East with a ruler, and that is why the region is broken. And the honest history is that Sykes-Picot did not draw today's borders. Most of its lines did not even survive. The actual borders came much later. They came through other conferences, such as Lausanne and others, and some of them followed older Ottoman administrative lines, not mere European whimsy. And the exact cartography is extremely overstated. But hear what survives the correction, because it is more damning, not less. The lines moved, yes. The arrogance did not. The scandal of Sykes-Picot was never the precise geometry. It was that the fate of millions was decided in secret in European capitals over their heads as spoils for oil, for roots, for empire, by men who never once asked the people whose lives they were trading. They did not draw our borders with a ruler. They presumed to own. They treated a living people as property to be divided. And that, the presumption that a people can be owned and parceled out, that has a name in the book of God. And we will reach it before this point is complete. This, the whole long story of how faith in a people take root in the world, without being carved up or erased, is a road that we are opening properly as a weekly series, God willing, on Saturdays. And the details will be published at our website, truthpromoters.com. Tonight, it's only the doorway. But I can't leave the doorway without one important correction that saves the whole argument from becoming the very sin that it's diagnosing. Because here is the trap that we really must not walk into. The instant we turn around and say, the British did this, we have replaced one collective blame with another. We have taken the sin of judging a whole people, the sin that was done to the Muslims, to the people of West Asia and other parts of the world, and simply turned it around and aimed it back. That isn't justice. That is the same crime in a mirror. So hear the truth, which is more uncomfortable and yet more liberating than the slogan. Empire was not the British. Empire was the clique and its companies, just like it is today. The spearhead at that time of it was the Chartered Corporation, the English East India Company with its own private army that ruled India for profit, the Dutch East India Company that ruled before it. The decisions that bled India and Java were taken by shareholders and directors of a tiny political financial elite, not by the weavers of Lancashire or the farmhands of Devon, most of whom never saw a penny of the plunder, and many of whom were being ground into the dirt at home at the very same time. And let me give you one fact that breaks this binary completely, and hopefully permanently. When the American Civil War cut off raw cotton, the mills of Lancashire closed and the workers starved. Unemployment at nearly 60%, families facing eviction and starvation. And those starving English workers, in their hunger, refused to touch the slave-picked cotton of the Confederacy because they knew the last hands on that cotton were the hands of slaves, and they would not buy their own bread with another man's chains. The English working poor, in the depths of their own hunger, chose solidarity with the enslaved over their own survival. There is no cleaner refutation of the British were the oppressors than this. They were, so many of them, the oppressed, and they still reached for justice. And this is the case even today. The Irish in the same century were London's own colonial victims, food exported out of their country while millions of them starved. History will not give you a clean line between the guilty nations and the innocent ones. And this is not merely good manners, it is doctrine. God says in his book, In Quran, Surah Al-An'am, the chapter of the cattle, 6th chapter of the Quran, verse 164. And no bearer of burdens shall bear the burden of another. Collective guilt is forbidden to us. We may not lay the sins of the elite upon the people, which means the oppressor is never a nation and never a race. The oppressor is a system. The system the Quran calls istikbar, arrogance made into power. And that system has citizens in every land, including in the West, in the East, in the North, and in the South. And the oppressed likewise are found in every land, in Lancashire and in Ireland, as surely as in Baghdad or Gaza. The frontier is the seam between the oppressor and the oppressed, and it runs through London as surely as it runs through Karbala. It does not run between peoples, it runs through every one of them. So, if the frontier is not a national border, and the oppressor is not a people but rather a system, then who today actually holds the line? Who are the people of the frontier in our own age? And the answer, most of the time, is not a soldier at all. Listen to a hadith of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him. A hadith that takes the whole vocabulary of this supplication and moves it off the battlefield entirely. The references are, of course, in the write-up. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq says, the scholars among our Shia are the frontier guards, the Murābaṭun, stationed at the frontier that faces Iblis or Satan and his defiant ones. They prevent them from coming out against the weak amongst our Shia, and they prevent Iblis and his followers from gaining mastery over them. Think about that. Look at what Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq just did. He took the word Murābaṭun, frontier guards, the men of the Thughur, and he gave it to the scholars, to the teachers, to the ones who clarify, who explain, who do Tabyeen. The frontier that they hold is the one that faces Iblis or Satan himself, and their post is to keep him from getting at the weak. The weapon on that frontier is not the sword, it is the pen, it is the tongue, the clear word that keeps a believer from being overrun by confusion and despair. And I want to say the obvious thing out loud, because it is the meta beat that this whole night has been building toward. That is what is happening in this room right now. When we stand here and we clarify what a supplication actually says, we reference actual scholars. When we take a difficult verse, a hard verse, and explain it before it's weaponized, when we refuse the lie and we name the system, that is Murābaṭa. The teacher doing Tabyeen is a border guard on the frontier that faces Satan. This sermon is, with God's grace, enacting its own thesis. We are standing at the very frontier that we are describing. And when you see it, you see the line holders everywhere, and almost none of them carry a rifle. The jurists of Najaf who kept the lamp of guidance lit under every dynasty that came and went above them. The scholars of Qom who rebuilt what tyranny had burnt, and who keep building and moving forward regardless of the cost. The doctor who stays in Gaza when every reason in the world says that he should leave. The journalist who files a story that no one will buy and that costs her everything. The mother who will not let her children quietly drift away from al-Bayt and the true Islam, who holds that line at her own kitchen table year after unthanked year. Every one of them is tied to a seam. Every one of them is what we call a Murābaṭa. The frontier guard of our age is very rarely an actual soldier. He or she is far more often a person holding a line that no one is filming. But I have to stop here and once more be honest, because the hadith of Imam Sadiq is a double-edged thing, and the wrong people love to pick up on it. If the scholar is the frontier guard, then we are owed a question, and it is not an optional one. Which scholar? Because the turban is not the frontier and the title is not the wall. The robe does not make a man a guard any more than a uniform makes a man a soldier. Our tradition is very exact about what a scholar of God actually is, and it is not the man who has learnt to perform as one. Imam Musa al-Kadhim, peace and blessings be upon him, gave us the measure, and notice that he reaches for the very same image this whole night has been built on, the fortress. Imam Musa al-Kadhim says, and the references of course are in the write-up, when a believing jurist dies, a breach is opened in Islam that nothing can fill. For the believing jurists are the fortresses of Islam, like the fortresses of a city's wall for it. Reflect on both halves of that. The true scholar is a fortress, the wall that stands between the people inside and everything outside that means to harm them. And when one of them is lost, a breach is opened that nothing can fill. Now put those two halves together and you arrive at the thing we must say out loud tonight. A wall with a rotten stone is more dangerous than no wall at all. Reason? Because the people behind it believe they are protected, when in reality, because the wall is rotten, they are not. The imposter in the scholar's robe is not a mere harmless disappointment. He is a breach that everyone has mistaken for the wall. And our masters did not flinch from naming them. Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, warned the students of the seminary, the very ones who would one day climb onto pulpits like this one, in the starkest of words. Imam Khomeini writes, this is from his 40 hadith, the references are of course in the write-up. Imam Khomeini said, this knowledge is not like other sciences. This knowledge is either a proof for you or a proof against you. If you do not purify your soul, this knowledge becomes a proof against you, and its consequence is dire for you and for your community. A proof against you and dire for your community. The knowledge of God is not inert. Carried by a person, a man who has not purified the self that carries it, it does not sit harmlessly in the head. It curdles. It becomes a weapon turned the wrong way around. Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, may God rest his pure soul, used to teach this kind of claimant is more dangerous than an ordinary sinner, because the open sinner only harms himself, while the hollow scholar hollows the religion out from the inside, in front of the very people who trust him the most. And Ayatollah Jawadi Amali named exactly how the damage is done. And of course the references are all in the write-up. Ayatollah Jawadi said, some are busy with study and discussion. They have memorized the words, but the words have not been kept safe from the assault of the lower self. This becomes the greatest veil. Such a person issues verdicts, gives lectures, writes books, yet has never seen or known his own self. And so his speech is not a source of movement towards God, it produces only confusion and darkness. His speech produces only confusion and darkness. This is that breach in motion. Consider. A young person walks into a majlis, a program. Someone who is already struggling, already half asking in the dark whether any of this is even true. And they hear a man on the pulpit reaching for a weak and brittle argument, and they watch it snap in front of them. What does the young person conclude? He doesn't conclude that the speaker was weak. They conclude that the religion was weak. The God who was supposed to defend the frontier of that young person's faith has, with his own untrained hands, handed the enemy the breach. Let me put it another way, perhaps a way that a soldier might understand, because it's the cleanest way for me to say it. No general in his right mind takes a man who has barely survived basic training and sends him to hold the line at the front. Not because the man is wicked, he may be brave, he may be sincere, but because an untrained body at the frontier is a liability. He will do one of two things. He will spend his own life for nothing, wastefully in the first hour, or, and this is worse, he will break under the first real pressure and give up the position, reveal where the line is thin, surrender any password, hand the enemy the very gap he was stationed there to close. To march the untrained to the front is not zeal. It is the betrayal of every soldier standing behind him. And the frontier of faith is no different. To climb the pulpit and speak in the name of the family of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and his righteous companions, without the long and painful training of the self and the sciences both, is to walk an untrained soldier into the most important war there is. We were warned about this on our night of discernment. Do not pursue that of which you have no knowledge. From Quran, Surah Al-Isra, the chapter of the night journey. The verse that told us the eye and the ear and the heart will each be questioned. And there is one test, a single, very clean test, that tells the guard from the imposter. And it's not how much a man knows. It's what his ego will let him say. The commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, gives it to us in a handful of words. The references are all in the write-up. Imam Ali says, saying I do not know is half of knowledge. The true God can say it. I do not know. Let me return to the books. Because he fears God more than he fears the silence in the room. The imposter, on the other hand, cannot. Because his standing and very often his living depends on the performance that he has every answer. The willingness to say, I do not know, is not the scholar's weakness. It is the proof that he is actually standing at the frontier and is not just in fancy dress. And now, because I have stood here tonight and called the scholar a frontier guard, and it is me standing at this pulpit, let me be the very first to stand under that measure, or I have understood nothing that I myself have said. The hadith of the Imam is not a medal that any of us pins to our chests. It is a weight and a fear and a prayer. To stand in this place is to be answerable for every single word spoken and every single word written. And the most honest sentence I can give you is the commander of the faithfuls, that where I do not know, I am bound to say so and go back and learn. So do not hear me exempting the one who is speaking. Hold me to this. Hold every one of us, anyone who climbs the pulpit, hold them to this place. And pray that God makes us worthy of this trust and keeps us from ever becoming a breach in the very wall that we have spent our lives defending and this whole night describing. The frontier is held by the one who trembles at the responsibility of it, and it is lost by the one who has learnt to enjoy it. Please give me a salawat and we move on to the weapon no one will live stream.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So this brings us to the fighter's first weapon, and it turns out to be the same weapon as the scholars and the mothers. Even for the one who does carry iron, the supplication asks God for something inward before anything outward. Of the individual warrior, the Imam says, and the reference again is in the write-up, Imam Sajjad writes in Du'a Ahl al-Thughur, and remove from him hypocrisy and purify him from the seeking of fame, and make his thinking and his remembrance, his going forth and his staying still, all of it in you and for you alone. Purify him from the seeking of fame. Before God is asked to make the warrior brave, God is asked to make him sincere, to strip out the part of him that wants to be seen being brave. And Ayatollah Jawadi Amali draws the order of it out exactly. And the reference again is in the write-up. Ayatollah Jawadi writes, in the logic of the Sahifa, the monotheist soldier, before he is armed with iron, must be armed with sincerity. Armed with sincerity before the iron. And here's the line I want to leave you with from this whole point. The one that ties back to the false, aestheticized witness we spent earlier nights tearing down. The truest witness is the one no one will ever live stream. The mother at the kitchen table, the scholar at the desk at 3 in the morning, The soldier who effaces his own name so that the cause can keep its face. The frontier most faithfully held is almost always the one with no camera on it. So, we have moved the frontier off the map and into the heart, into the home, into the scholar's frontier against Iblis, against Satan. But there is still a frontier on the actual earth, and a real seam between real oppressors and real oppressed. And now I can give it its true name, because the book of God names the method of every tyrant who has ever drawn a people on a map in order to own them. It is Pharaoh's method. Listen to how God describes him. This is from Quran, Surah Al-Qasas, the chapter of the narrations, 28th chapter of the Quran, verse number 4. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "Indeed, Pharaoh exalted himself in the land and made its people into factions, oppressing a group amongst them, slaughtering their sons and sparing their women. Indeed, he was one of the corruptors." So, 3 things in one verse, and watch them land on everything that we've said thus far. Ala fil ard, he exalted himself in the land. That is istikbar, the posture of the arrogant power, the self that sets itself above. Ja'ala ahlaha shi'a, he made its people into factions. That is divide and rule itself, the fracturing of a people so they cannot unite against the throne. And yastad'ifu ta'ifatan, he kept a group of them weak. That is deliberate manufacturing of the mustad'afin, the oppressed. So exalt yourself over the land, fracture its people into fearful factions who hate each other, keep the pieces weak, that is Pharaoh's verb. And Sykes-Picot is that verb turned into various treaties. Divide and rule has a Quranic name, and it's Pharaoh's. So the real frontier is exactly what we said at the start, not a national border, but the seam between the mustakbir, the arrogant, and the mustadaf, the oppressor and the oppressed, wherever on the earth it falls. Allama Tabatabai in Tafsir al-Mizan says it with full force. Again, the references are in the write-up. Allama writes, "The true boundaries of the earth are not the political lines drawn by tyrants, but the boundaries that separate the party of God from the party of Satan. So wherever an oppressed one resists a tyrant, there the frontier, the Thughur, is actualized in its deepest sense." And Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, took the same truth and gave it the name our whole series carries. The reference again is in the write-up. Imam Khomeini says, "Today, wherever there is oppression and an oppressed one stands against the oppressor, there is Karbala, and there is the frontier of Islam. Every land where the oppressed stands against the oppressor is Karbala. It is the frontier of Islam. The line runs through every people. It runs through each and every one of us." Please give me a salawat and we move on to the point which is you are already at a frontier.
Allahumma salli ala
صلي على
Muhammad wa ala
محمد وجه الفرج.
Muhammad.
And now the supplication turns at its very end and does the most tender thing in it. Having prayed for the army, for the single warrior, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him, turns to everyone else, to the people who will never stand on a battlefield in their lives. And he hands them the reward of the frontier anyway. Look at who he names. The one who takes the fighter's place at home. The one who looks after the family the fighter left behind. The one who gives a little of his wealth. The one who guards the fighter's honor in his absence. And listen to this one. The one who only made a prayer, a supplication for him. Of all of these, the Imam prays, and the references in the write-up. He says, or sends a prayer after him as he sets out, or guards his honor in his absence, then grant him the like of the warrior's own reward. Weight for weight and like for like. Weight for weight and like for like. The one who only prayed is given the same reward as the one who fought. And the Imam goes further still, to the very edge of what God's mercy will do. He turns to the believer who wanted to go, who intended the whole of it, with his heart, but was simply prevented by weakness, by poverty, by some accident of fate that kept him seated while his soul was already on the road. Imam Sajjad writes in Du'a Ahl, the references in the write-up, then write his name amongst the worshippers, and make the reward of the strugglers fall due to him, and place him firmly in the ranks of the martyrs, the witnesses, and the righteous. Place him among the ranks of the martyrs or witnesses and the righteous. The man who never lifted a sword, who was kept from the field, who carried the whole of it only in his intention. God writes his name in the register of the Shahada, of the witnesses, among the witnesses, among the grades of witness, the very taxonomy this whole series has been climbing, the grades we will name one by one tomorrow night, God willing. So understand exactly what the supplication has just told us. Intention is the witness. The grade is God's to assign. You do not have to die to be counted among those who bore witness. You have to be willing, truly willing, with the whole of your heart, and then to hold the line that is given to you. Hold on to that. It is the seed of everything tomorrow night will be. Because here's the application, and I want it to land on each of you personally. You may never see a battlefield. You may never set foot in a Muslim majority land if you're not living there already. And the supplication has just told you, in the Imam's own words, that this changes nothing about your standing. If you are holding the frontier that is actually yours, and you are already stationed at one, let me name yours. There is the workplace, the meeting, the corridor, the group chat, where a thing is said about Islam or about the oppressed or something that you know to be a lie, and where the easy thing, the infinitely easy thing, is to let it stand and keep your comfort. That is a thabr. Your dignity is being tested. Your dignity is being tested at it this week. There is the home, the dinner table, the bedtime, the long ordinary years, where your children will either come to love al-Bayt and Allah or God, or quietly drift away from them, and where the line is held not in one heroic moment, but in tens of thousands of unwitnessed ones. That is the thabr, and it may be the most important one that we ever hold. And there is the heart in your own chest, where every single day truth and falsehood fight the quiet war we open this whole night with. That is the first thabr, the one the supplication began with, and it is the only one that is constantly under attack. Du'a Ahl al-Thughur is not a museum piece about 8th century border forts. It is a supplication that Imam Zayn al-Abidin, peace and blessings be upon him, wrote for each of us, for the believer in the city far from any war, who did not know he was already standing at a frontier and already was a guardian of it. But there is a frontier inside the community itself, and it is the one we are losing most quietly. And the Book of God set the whole battle for it in a single contrast, a contrast that is the moral climax of this entire night. Remember Pharaoh's verb. He made the people into factions in order to divide them. Now hear what God says he made us into and why. In Quran, Surah Hujurat, the chapter of the chambers or the apartments, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse number 13. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O mankind, we created you from a male and a female and made you into peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most honored of you before God is the most God conscious of you. Now put these two verses side by side and feel the blade between them. Pharaoh makes one people into what we call Shia, factions, to divide and weaken. God makes humanity into shu'uban wa qaba'ila, people and tribes, lita'arafu, that they may know one another. The very same human diversity, the opposite purpose. God's diversity is an invitation. The tyrant's diversity is a weapon. The difference between the two is the entire difference between Karbala and the throne. And the only ranking God will allow is the one he names in the very next breath. Not nation, not tribe, not bloodline, but atqakum. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most God conscious. The best of you is the most God conscious. Every other hierarchy belongs to Pharaoh. So, what is this knowing, this ta'aruf? It is the heart of the whole matter, so we must be exact about it. To know one another is to learn from them, to love them, to respect them, and above all, to shield them. To see a brother's weakness and guard it, because you have your own weaknesses and he is guarding yours. And there is a counterfeit of ta'aruf, an inversion of it, and it has its author. To learn a brother's weakness in order to defeat him. To study another only to find the seam where you can break him. That is the satanic reading of lita'arafu. And I mean satanic with full precision. Because the first act of othering by origin in all of creation was that of Iblis or Satan. Commanded to bow to Adam by God, he refused and he gave his reason. Quran, Surah A'raf, the chapter of the heights, 7th chapter of the Quran, verse number 12, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he quotes Iblis, he said, I am better than him. You created me from fire and you created him from clay. Think about that. I am better than him. My origin is higher than his. That is the first supremacy. Every racial caricature, every those people, every dehumanizing trope that has ever been used to make war easier or an occupation cleaner, every one of them descends from ana khayrun minh. I am better than him. I am higher than him. Supremacy by substance is satanic in its most literal sense of the word. And it is the exact inversion of ta'aruf, where God says, know one another. Satan says, rank yourself above the other. Where God says, shield your brother's weakness, Satan says, leverage it, use it. So here is the believer's answer, and it is a communal jihad, not a solitary one. Shield your brother's weakness, and he will shield yours. The single practice ties the two struggles of our whole tradition together. The greater jihad, in which each of us guards the frontier of his or her own nafs, and the lesser jihad, in which the community together guards its outer frontier. A people who shield one another cannot be divided. And a people who have been taught to see each other as weaknesses to exploit have already been conquered before a single soldier arrives. Divide and rule wins precisely when lita'aruf fails. But I have to stop on that word, shield, because it hides a trap. The same whisper that tells one man to use his brother's weakness will tell the next to cover it. So let me be very exact and precise about what the shield is and what it is not. Please give me a salawat and we go into guardians, not accomplices.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل
محمد
محمد
وعجل
وعجل
فرجه.
Because there are two ways to betray a brother, not just one. The first we've named, to take his weakness and break him with it. The second, however, wears the mask of love. To take his wrong and cover it. To call silence loyalty and complicity brotherhood. And the satanic whisper is just as content to hand you the second as it is the first. Either one breaches the wall. So hear what shielding actually is in the Quran's own words. God describes the believers in this way. This is from Quran, Surah Tawbah, the chapter of the repentance, 9th chapter of the Quran, verse 71. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and the believing men and the believing women are allies, awliya of one another. They enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. And they establish the prayer and give the alms and obey God and his messenger. Those God will have mercy upon them. Indeed, God is mighty and wise. Look at what this verse does. It calls the believers awliya of one another, guardians, protectors, the closest of allies. And then in the very same breath, it tells you what the guardianship is made of. They enjoin the right and they forbid the wrong. So to be your brother or sister's wali is, by God's own definition, to forbid his wrong and enjoin his good, not to enable his wrong. A shield that covers a brother's sin is not a higher form of wilayah. It is the death of the wilayah. A people who cover one another's wrongs are not the believers of this verse. They are its mirror image. The same surah has described a few lines before, those whose bond commands the wrong and forbids the right. The same closeness, but the opposite content. The believer's bond forbids the wrong. The hypocrite's bond hides it. And God forbids the covering outright. And in the same breath in which he commands us to help one another towards good, he bars its opposite. In Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, the chapter of the table spread, 5th chapter of the Quran, verse number 2, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And help one another towards righteousness and God consciousness, but do not help one another towards sin and aggression, and be mindful of God. Indeed, God is severe in penalty." To shield a brother's ongoing wrong is not setr, which is the noble covering of a fault. It is ta'awun al-itham, helping another to sin, which is the flattering compromise our ethicists count among the greatest diseases of the soul. To cover the sin is to share in it. So then what do? The Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions, gave us the rule in a very simple and single sentence. And this is transmitted by Imam Ali from Nahj al-Balagha. The references, of course, are in the write-up. Help your brother whether he is an oppressor or oppressed. It was said, Messenger of God, we know how to help him when he is wronged. But how do we help him when he is the wrongdoer? He said, you restrain him from his wrongdoing. That is how you help him. You restrain him from his wrongdoing. That is your help. So, if a brother is, God forbid, wronging his wife or his children or anyone, God has placed within reach of his hand. To shield him is to stop him. Being stopped is the rescue. A man left to his oppression is a man you are watching walk towards the fire and somehow in some delusion calling it a kindness. To cover that is not mercy. It is to hold the rope while he hangs his own soul. And hear this with full clarity, because it is exactly where the danger lives. The one he is wronging is your brother or your sister, and the wronged holds the first claim. Our jurists draw the line precisely over here. The covering of faults is for a private failing between a servant and his Lord. Haqqullah, God's own right, which God himself loves to cover and veil up. It is never a license over the haqqun nas, the right of the people, the right of the wronged. Where there is a victim, protecting the victim and seeing justice done outranks the covering of the one who harmed them. And to shield an oppressor at the expense of the oppressed is not sitr at all. It is dhulm, oppression, wearing a borrowed cloak. The cry of the mustad'af, the oppressed, the men, the women and the children who call out for a protector, does not fall silent because the one who wronged them shares our name or looks in a particular way. And none of this licenses humiliation. That is the first ditch, and we do not leap into it to escape the second. Our tradition makes the believer the mirror of his brother. A mirror shows you your face truthfully, but it never announces your blemish to the room. You go to him in private, the fault carried in your hand like a gift, never thrown from your tongue in the crowd. The ethical handbook of our seminaries gathers both duties into a single line. Conceal his fault from the eyes of others, counsel him in secret, and bear the hurt that comes of it, patiently for as long as it takes, seeking nothing but his guidance and his rescue. The references in the write-up, this is from Jami' al-Sa'adat of Ayatollah Naraqi. He writes, concealing the faults of the believers is among the most noble of traits. It is obligatory upon the believer when he discovers a fault in his brother to conceal it, advise him privately and not expose him. Rather, he must exert himself in counseling and guiding and bear the harm that may come in seeking his guidance and salvation. And what of the consequence? When the wrong was real and a price must be paid. Here our tradition shows us its most astonishing picture of what brotherhood unto reform can truly look like. There was a man in Kufa, and the references are all in the write-up. There was a man in Kufa in the days of the Commander of the Faithful, peace and blessings be upon him, whose hand the Imam's own justices had cut for theft. He went out into the street holding his severed hand, and a Khariji agitator, one of these extremists, an agitator named Ibn al-Kawa, saw a wound that he could harvest. And he came to him to turn him bitter against Imam Ali. Who did this to you? The man answered his question. Why should I not praise him when love for him has mingled with my flesh and my blood? By God, he did not cut it off except by a right that God had made binding upon me, by which he delivers me from the punishment of the hereafter. The references are all in the write-up. He bore the consequence, and it did not embitter him, rather it healed him. The justice that fell on him, he received it as a hand reaching down to pull him out of a far worse fire. And the agitator who came to weaponize his wound left entirely empty-handed and humiliated. Because a heart that has truly returned to God cannot be recruited by the dividers, not by any Ibn al-Kawa, not by Muawiyah's men, not by all of these various entities that want to recruit people, not by anyone. Shaykh Mutahari reads the whole scene as a scale that weighs the soul. Imam Ali is the criterion of human nature. The sound heart takes no offense at his justice even as it falls, because Imam Ali is nothing but the truth made flesh. That is reform through consequence. We do not spare our brother the price. We walk beside him while he pays it, and we help him carry it home to God. The door of the frontier is not shut to the one who has fallen. It is shut only to the one who refuses to rise. And now the hardest term, the one that keeps all of this honest. The first wall I am charged to guard is my own. Before I am my brother's guardian, I am my own. And the Murābaṭa, who would die before he let an enemy breach the line, must not be the one standing there in the dark, quietly chipping away and loosening the stones himself. The prophets showed us this. Moses at the well, with no human eye upon him, turned first upon himself. In Quran, Surah Qasas, the chapter of the narrations, 28th chapter of the Quran, verse number 16, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he quotes Moses. He said, my Lord, I have wronged myself, so forgive me. And he forgave him. Indeed, he is the forgiving, the merciful. Rabbi inni zalamtu nafsi. My Lord, I have wronged myself. It is the very confession we place on our own tongues every Thursday night in Du'a Ahl. The honest frontier guard does not only ask, where is your brother? He turns and asks, where am I? He holds himself to the wall first, and only the one who will forbid the wrong in his own chest has earned the right to forbid it gently in his brother's. So the shield is not the sword that exposes, and it is not the blanket that hides. It is the hand that catches a falling brother and pulls him back towards God, guarding his dignity from the crowd, refusing his wrong to his face, protecting whoever he has wronged, and walking with him through every consequence all the way home. To forbid a brother's wrong is to bear witness to the truth. To cover it is to bear false witness to his side. And that, all of it, is what we have been asking every single night of this series when we ask, where is your brother? Not only is he safe, but is he whole? Is he upright? And if he has fallen, will I be the one who helps him to rise? And this is where I have to say one hard thing very plainly and then guard it very carefully. The manufactured fear of a whole people, the slow drip of caricature until a group becomes a standing object of dread, is not an accident and not a natural prejudice. It is a technique. It is the Pharaoh strategy in modern dress. Fracture the people, Give the frightened crowd a them to hate, so that their anger lands on a vulnerable neighbor instead of on the power that is actually bleeding them. The scapegoat protects the powerful. It's the oldest trick there is. But the moment we name that technique, we're standing on the edge of the very cliff we have been warning about all night. Because the technique's favorite payoff is always, in the end, to blame a people. So here's the guardrail, said as clearly as I can say it. And it is the same principle from the first point, come back for the third time, as I had said. Name the system, refuse the master plot, never blame a people. Name istikbar, the documented coordination of elites and corporations and states, which is fair and sober analysis. But, this is important, but do not reach for a single hidden cabal that secretly runs all of history, because that is unfalsifiable and because it is the very engine of the othering we are diagnosing. It has been used to manufacture hatred against whole peoples. It has collateral damage. And to reach for it would be to commit in the same breath the exact sin that we're condemning. It would always, in the end, blame a people, and no bearer of burdens bears the burden of another. We will, God willing, clear this wreckage properly, the whole machinery of the manufactured other and the manufactured fear of Islam and indeed of God itself. Not the reverential fear, but the irrational fear that creates hatred. In the same Saturday series that I've mentioned earlier, and the details again, like I said, will be on our website, truthpromoters.com. Tonight, only the naming, because the cure is not more, and it's not more naming of enemies. The cure is lita'arafu. So let me close this point by lifting your eyes, the way the book lifts them. The tyrant fractures the map and calls it his. And God answers in the same chapter where he named Pharaoh's method with a promise. This is from Quran, Surah Al-Qasas, the chapter of the narrations, 28th chapter of the Quran, verse number 5. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we desired to bestow a favor upon those who were oppressed in the land, and to make them leaders and to make them inheritors. The mustada'afin, the very group that the Pharaoh of every age keeps weak. That same group God wills to make into leaders and al-warithin, the inheritors. And this rests on the deepest deed of all, the one Moses spoke to his own frightened, oppressed people when they could see no way out. In Quran, Surah Al-A'raf, chapter of the heights, 7th chapter of the Quran, verse 128. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed the earth belongs to God. He bequeaths it to whom he wills of his servants, and the final outcome belongs to the God conscious. The earth belongs to God, not to the men in a room in 1916, not to the so-called Board of Peace, not to anyone like this, not to any empire who has ever drawn a line on it. The tyrant fractures the map. God promises the fractured the inheritance of the whole of it. And that promise is not a metaphor, and it's not just a consolation. It is a destination. Fulfilled in the end under the Imam of the age, the master of our time, may our souls be his ransom, and may God hasten his return. When the last frontier between oppressed and oppressor is finally closed, and the earth is handed, at last, to those who held its lines for nothing but the love of God. That is where this road is going. That is the direction of travel. We will stand at its ends together, God willing, on the last of these nights. And until then, until that dawn, we hold the line, which is exactly what a man of our own lifetime did, and he told his daughter how. Please give me a loud salawat, and we go to the final point, which is the man who tied himself to God.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل محمد
محمد وعجل فرجه.
So we spent the whole night on a word, Murābaṭa, the one who is tied to the frontier from the root rabt, to bind. And I promised you near the beginning that a man of our own lifetime would come and define that word for us. So here he is. And if he defined it not in a lecture or in a battlefield, but in a private letter to his daughter Fatima. Hajj Qasem Soleimani, may God rest his pure soul, sat down to tell his child why he had chosen the path that he had chosen. And he began not with politics, but with the most honest question a human being can ask. And the references are all in the write-up. Hajj Qasem writes, I saw that everyone in this world has chosen a path for himself. I looked to see which path I ought to choose, and I asked myself, first, how long is this path? Where is its end? How much time do I have? And fundamentally, what is my destination? I saw that I am temporary and that everyone is temporary. Think about that. I saw that I am temporary and everyone is temporary. That is where a man of the frontier begins. Not with what he can hold, but with the knowledge that he holds nothing for very long. And from there he reasons his way past the one thing that pulls every guardian off his line. The very thing the supplication asked God to erase. Khatarat al-mal al-fatun. The whispering of seductive wealth. Listen to how completely Hajj Qasem cleared it. Again, the references in the write-up. Hajj Qasem writes, I saw that if I went into commerce, its outcome would be a quantity of shiny coins, a few houses, a few cars. But those have no effect whatsoever on my destiny upon this path. Think about that. Shiny coins, a few houses, a few cars, no effect on my destiny. That is portions of our supplication lived. The world cleared out of the heart so that nothing could pull him off the line. But then comes the most extraordinary turn in the letter, and it is the whole of tonight in a single sentence. Because he tells Fatima that he had thought, instead of simply living for them, for his children, whom he loved past bearing, and he found that even that love could not cure his fear, the dread of loss, the terror of hardship befalling them. And so he reached for the only thing that he could. And again, the references are in the write-up. Hajj Qasem writes, I realized that I had to tether myself, to bind myself to someone who could cure me of this, and he is none other than God. I had to tether myself to God. And the word he uses, muttasil, bound, tied, connected. The Murābaṭa is, by the meaning of his very name, the one who is tied. And Hajj Qasem tied himself not to a border, not to a cause, not even to the children, but to God. That is the secret of the frontier, handed from a father to his daughter, in plain words that she could keep. The guardian of the line is not the one with the strongest grip on the world. He is the one who has let go of the world entirely and bound himself to the one who made it. The frontier guard of our own lifetime defined Murābaṭa in a letter to his child, and the definition was, be tied to God and to nothing else. That is the same watchfulness, the salt in the eyes wakefulness we spoke of on the night of his teacher's vigil in one of the 10 nights of Muharram, of Ashura. A heart so tied to God that nothing the world offers and nothing the world threatens can move it from its post. That is the prayer for the people of the frontiers, walked in our own years by a man who knew exactly what he was doing when he stood at the seam between the oppressor and the oppressed, and he would not step back from it. And so, let me ask you to leave tonight with the line in your hands, not just in your eyes. The first thing, find your frontier and admit that it is yours. There's not an Iraq, it is not on the map. It is in the room where the lie is comfortable and the truth is costly. Your workplace, your timeline, your dinner table, your university, anywhere. It is in the home where the children are learning to love and follow al-Bayt or not. It is, before all of these, in your own heart, in all of our hearts, where the quiet war runs unstopped, day after day after day, second after second. We are not the audience of the prayer for the people of the frontiers. We are its subject. Name your frontier, name your thagh, and stand in it. And the second thing, hold the line the way the household held it, by knowing, not by dividing. When you are handed the easy hatred of a whole people, refuse it. Or even one person, refuse it. Name the system, never the people. Shield your brother's weaknesses and trust him to shield yours. لِتَعَارَفُوا, that you may know one another. It's not some soft sentiment. It is the frontier itself. And we lose it the moment we let ourselves be recruited into anyone's manufactured fear. Anyone's. And the third thing, the one the supplication ends on, so we will also, you do not have to fall to be a witness, but you must be willing. The one who only intended and was prevented is written among the martyrs and the righteous, the witnesses and the righteous. The intention is the witness. The grade is God's. So be willing, truly, with the whole of our hearts, and then hold whatever line is actually given to you for nothing but the love of God, where no one is filming. Every day is Ashura, every land is Karbala, and actually, Karbala is each and every one of us. And every believer tonight is standing at a frontier that he had not named. Tomorrow night, the road to Arbaeen turns into its darkest room. We will go down into the ruins of Sham, of Damascus, to a child in a dungeon, to the smallest of the household, and to the grades of witness that a child can carry. And we will ask what it means that the testimony was kept even there, even by her, a child in the dungeon. But that is tomorrow. Tonight, there is one more voice, the one in whose lineage the man who wrote our supplication stands, and in whose lineage we stand. It was his voice that carried us through the 10 nights of Ashura and broke at the trampling. Last night, at the sound of his aunt's words, it began to find its feet. Tonight, he tells us of his grandfather, Ali ibn al-Hussein, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the one survivor of the men who, when he could no longer raise a sword, raised a hand and hid a whole doctrine inside the lines of his supplication, the very supplication that we discussed in this session. Beside the candle tonight, there is one small thing laid on the grey stone, a chain of prayer beads, a tasbih, resting beside the taper, the line holder's quiet weapon, the worship that holds when nothing else can. Look at it while you listen, and then listen to the voice. But let me say plainly what it is so that no one mistakes it for what it is not. What you're about to hear is not a man reciting, and it is not, God forbid the claim, the voice of the Imam himself, for lone living soul has heard his true voice. It is an imagining of that voice, his words, the words of the one who watched and who remembers, carried to you in clear English by the means of our own age, so that they might reach the heart directly, as though he was speaking to you plainly from behind the veil. Take it as a vessel only, a humble reaching toward him, never a standing in his place. May God forgive us the presumption of it and accept the love that reaches. Please give me a salawat and we segue across to the maqta.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد
محمد وعجل فرجه.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل محمد
محمد وعجل
فرجه.
فرجه.
And so now we have a short supplication and then we end for the evening. In the name of God, the Lord of the martyrs and the truthful, the Lord of the witnesses and the truthful. Peace be upon Abel, the first witness of the earth, who would rather be killed than kill. Peace be upon every soul in every age and every land who has ever been driven from their home or kept weak in it only for saying our Lord is God. O God, we have nowhere to go but your door, and no one to ask but you, and no words except the ones you have placed on the tongues of your friends. O God, send your peace and your blessings upon your final messenger Muhammad and upon his pure family and upon his righteous companions. And send your peace upon the prophets of every house, upon Adam, upon Noah and Abraham and Ismail and Ishaq and Moses and Aaron, who told his frightened, depressed people that the earth belongs to God and the outcome belongs to the God conscious, and to David and Solomon and John the Baptist and Zechariah and Jesus the son of Mary, the Messiah. May our souls be his ransom, and may you, O our Lord, hasten his return, and upon every one of them whose name we know and whose name only you know. O God, this is the night of the prayer he could not say out loud. Send your peace upon our master Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn Zayn al-Abidin, the one survivor of the men of Karbala, whom you kept alive to keep the line, who held the frontier of guidance from a bed of chains, who, forbidden to teach in the open, hid the whole of the religion inside his whispered prayers, and taught your servants in the prayer of the people of the frontiers how every one of them is a guardian of the line. O God, teach us to hold that line as he held it. O God, send your peace and blessings upon our master Imam al-Husayn, the master of witnesses, and upon his father Imam Ali, the commander of the faithful, and his mother Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Peace and blessings be upon her, the mistress of the women of paradise, and his brother Imam al-Hasan, and his aunt and his sister Sayyid Zainab, who standing taught his grandson's grief how to stand. And upon al-Abbas and Ali al-Akbar and Qasim and the suckling Ali al-Asghar, and every companion who fell on that field, peace and blessings be upon them all. O God, and the longer return is always to the chain that runs from Imam Hussein through the Imams of guidance to the Imam of our age. May our souls be his ransom, and may you hasten his return, to whom the inheritance of the earth in truth belongs. O God, and upon those of our own age who tied themselves to you and held the seam between the oppressor and the oppressed and were taken for it. In this first Arbaeen, since the martyrdom of our beloved Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei, send your peace upon him and welcome him into your nearness with your prophets and your martyrs. Send your peace upon Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who was promised a meeting and kept it, and upon Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi and his wife Sayyid Siham and their little son Sayyid Hussein. Upon Shaykh Raghib Harb, who taught the South to refuse the occupier's hand. Upon Hajj Qasem Soleimani, who tethered himself to you and to nothing else, and who told his daughter so, and Hajj Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who fell with him in the one strike, and Hajj Ahmad Mughniya, who effaced his own name so the cause could keep its face. And upon Hajj Hussein Gharib, the reciter of the prayer of the frontiers, who became one of the people of the frontiers, and the members of his family who were taken with him also. O God, may your mercy and your peace rest upon their pure souls, and may you raise their stations and gather them with the ones that they loved. O God, send your peace upon the young men and children and women of the resistance in every land, of Palestine and Lebanon, Iraq and Yemen, and Syria and Bahrain and Kashmir and anywhere in the world. The doctors who would not leave, the teachers who would not lie, the mothers who would not let go, every guardian of a frontier no camera ever found. Peace be upon every child of Gaza pulled from the rubble. Peace be upon every child of Lebanon pulled from the rubble. Peace be upon everyone whose name only you remember, and we know that you remember each and every one. O God, and for those who still remain, we ask you for their protection. Preserve for us Imam Sayyid Mujtaba al-Husayni al-Khamenei, the Wali al-Faqih of our time. Strengthen him, guide him, and keep him firm upon the path until the appointed hour. And protect, O God, every righteous scholar and every faithful leader of guidance who remains, every Murābaṭa stationed at the frontier that faces Iblis. Shield them from the daggers of the shadows and keep them standing in the light. O God, hasten the return of the Imam of our age. Make us of his helpers, his soldiers, of those when he calls are already standing, already at our posts. O God, we always say as we end, indeed we are from you, and to you is our return. And we repeat your promise, which is an eternal promise for the patient and a warning for the wrongdoers. And those who do wrong will come to know at what bitter end they will return. And our trust in the holding of every line is in you alone. God is sufficient for us, and he is the best of guardians. Amen, O Lord merciful, O most merciful of the merciful. Amen, O Lord sustainer of the universes. And our final call is that all praise belongs to God, the Lord of the worlds, and may his peace and blessings be upon Muhammad and his pure household. وآخر دعواني الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.